and welcome to this podcast video interview with Cyndi Rhoades, who's the founder of Worn Again Technologies. Thank you very much, Cyndi, first of all, for taking part in Source for Tomorrow, powered by CommonShare, and for being here again today. We're really looking forward to finding out a little bit more about Worn Again Technologies.
Thanks so much. It's great to be with you here today. And so my name's Cyndi Rhoades, and I founded Worn Again back in 2005 with an ambition to eradicate textile waste. And we have quite a long history in terms of how we've gone about finding a solution to solving the problem of textile waste, having started out in upcycling textiles, making second life products and selling them on for the first sort of 7 or 8 years of the company's history. And we soon realized that the exercise of upcycling wasn't actually solving the problem of textile waste. We were only postponing prison blankets, decommissioned hot air balloons, airplane seat covers that were going into second life products. We were just preventing them from going to landfill a little bit longer, but we weren't solving the problem of waste. And to cut a long story short, we were introduced to a chemist in 2012 who we discussed the challenge of textile waste. We discussed the need for recycling, but more at the molecular level, recognizing that if we could find a solution to recycling the raw materials that go into textiles, then potentially we could evolve or find a solution to circularity, or enabling the circularity of raw materials in textiles. And when I talk about raw materials, I mean polyester and cotton being the most common fibers used today in textile production. And really that was our focus, was starting with those two materials. And since 2012, we've been in development of a process, a polymer recycling process that is able to separate polyester and cotton, purify those raw materials, and extract polyester and cellulose from cotton, free from dyes, other contaminants, anything that went in at the beginning of the production process, separating those out to then end up with two final products. So we have polyester on one hand, a polyester pellet, which is similar in structure and quality as virgin grade polyester made from oil byproducts. And then on the cotton side, we're able to dissolve that and decontaminate it, break it down, and recapture the cellulose to become a cellulosic pulp. And that, as well as the polyester pellet, both of those outputs then will go on to fiber spinning to become yarn, fabric, garments all over again.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that explanation. I just actually wanted to touch back on the problem, and just to get the whole kind of scale of the problem of textile waste. I mean, I don't know whether it could be specifically to do with polyester and cotton, or whether textile waste in general, but how many are actually ending up in landfill at the moment? How big is the problem?
Yeah, thanks, Nina. I think that the textile waste issue is massive. And it's also twofold. It's not just about waste, it's about resources. And when we look at the textile industry and the extremely high volumes of materials being used every year, in terms of polyester, new polyester, cotton, and cellulose, with polyester and cotton being the most popular fibers being used today, and I'm lumping cellulose in there as well, that accounts for about 64 million tons of new resources to make textiles every year. Now, on top of that, that figure is set to increase by 63% in the next decade, which means the demand for raw materials and the energy, the CO2 emissions, the water, land, pesticides, all of that involved in going into making new resources is going to really increased dramatically. So we've got a demand issue on the resource side. And then at the same time, we have a waste issue. We have mountains of textiles going to landfill and incineration every year. It's estimated around 53 million tons of textiles are either thrown away or incinerated. And then at the same time, we've got increase in demand for raw materials. We've got textiles being thrown away. And then there's a really small fact and figure, around less than 1% of textiles every year are going back into making new textiles. So there's just all these mad, crazy, big figures. And at the moment, the fact that only 1% or less than 1% are going back into making new textiles, we really have to shift the needle by bringing in new technologies that can essentially turn existing textiles back into new textiles. So we don't have that future resource issue. We don't need virgin resources. We can replace those with new raw materials that have been made from existing textiles.
Thank you very much. And just while we're on the subject of circularity, I think, you know, there are different understandings of what to be circular and circularity actually means. So what could we use as like a solid definition of circularity?
Yeah, very good question, because there's hundreds of different definitions out there. And I think also the definition of circularity is different when you're talking about different industries, different materials. And I think over the last couple of years, that definition of circularity for textiles has really evolved and become more comprehensive of all of the issues that we need to be looking at when we're looking at circularity and sustainability. And, you know, from our perspective as a company, we focus a lot on the circularity of raw materials. You know, we just think about end of use textiles. Once they can't be worn anymore, they're non-rewearable, we can bring them into our process and turn them back into new materials. But I think from a broader industry perspective, I think there's three components to circularity. Firstly is products and services. You know, how do we keep products in circulation for as long as possible? And that can also include designing for longevity, designing for recycling, you know, rental models, new reuse business models. There's so much repair, all those things you can do around keeping products in circulation for longer. Then there's the raw materials. Once products can no longer be reworn or reused, they can be broken down into their raw materials and brought back into supply chains. And then the third component to that, I think that we often miss, is about the people. You know, we have to be thinking about people in the supply chains, the millions of people around the world working in the industry, touching our textiles, making them, recycling them, collecting them. You know, it's such a core component. So if you bring all three of these combined, it hopefully paints a comprehensive picture of circularity and all of the sustainability issues that we want to capture as part of it.
Definitely.
It's not a short definition, sorry.
No, it's okay. I mean, it's great. And it really encompasses all different aspects of the supply chain and how we can actually make a move towards being sustainable too. So it's not just kind of like a one size fits all kind of approach either. In terms of companies being more circular, how can they do this? I mean, how easy is it for them to achieve it as well?
Very good question. And I wish that were a short answer as well. And I'd love to hear your views, because I'm sure you have a lot of thoughts and experience around this. I think it depends on where you sit, what type of company you are. If you're a brand and a retailer, you have a certain role to play as a seller of products, as a having the voice and the connection with consumers. There's a very key role to play there. Suppliers also, have their role to play. Consumers or citizens, whatever we call, their role in the future in a circular system will be to get their products back into the system or keeping them in circulation. So they, in turn, not just become a consumer of products, but also a supplier of materials back into the system, a very active role. Recyclers, they will play their role in making sure, and collectors and sorters. I mean, they're going to play a huge role in the future in terms of, what they're doing today versus what it's going to look like in the future. I mean, we need all those collectors, the sorters, the infrastructure to evolve, to really get that site, that part of the circular supply loop, really efficient, so that we're keeping everything from kind of ending up in landfill. So I think it depends where you sit, but everyone has a part to play in it. Every company needs to be active. They need to be vocal. They need to be involved, setting targets and learning about what is going to be needed, because we do have circularity will need new business models. It will need new technologies, and we need these technologies to scale rapidly. Some of us are still in development. Some are getting closer to market or already, at industrial level. It's going to take quite a stretch of time as we start rolling these out, expanding, replicating individual technologies, but also evolving to systems where each of these companies and components are all linked up. And it's exciting to see what's happening. There's so many, new developments, new collaborations and cooperations that will, support this innovation and circularity to flourish.
Thank you very much, Cyndi. Cyndi, now just moving on to technologies and how your technology actually works. When you introduced yourself and the company as well, you gave us a brief explanation of how your technology operates. Could you give us just a bit more kind of information into exactly how you're creating these kind of recycled raw materials, and really how they can benefit, companies or people who are watching this or listening to this podcast video, and also what stage are you in of your process as well?
Yeah, great. I think that's quite key, is maybe starting with where we're at in development and what it will enable and how it fits into that wider picture. So the process itself, as I said in the intro, is able to take in end-of-use textiles. We can take in pure polyester and polyester cotton blends, as well as polyester cellulosic blends. They go into the process, we separate, we recapture the raw materials, they go back into the supply chain. That's the overall process itself. And where we're at in developments, we're in year 9. We've been going for a while now, each stage going from really small beaker level up to 10 liters, 100 liters. And we're now at a pilot plant phase, which is, lots of metal, lots of pumps and filters. And it's not quite the full scale process yet, because what we're doing now is we're testing different steps in the process. We're optimizing each of those steps. And all of these trials that we're carrying out now will inform the next phase, which is a demonstration plant. And that demonstration plant will then be the miniature version of a full-scale plant. And as soon as that has been finalized, we will then license that technology, license that plant design to plant operators around the world. They could be polyester producers, cellulosic fiber spinners. They could be waste management companies, a whole host of different types of plant operators. And so we'll license the technology, and that will then tap into that wider world of textile collection, where we will require our specification of pure polyester and polycotton blends to come into the process, be sorted efficiently. We need buttons, zips, accessories, all to be chopped off, because we can't have things like metal coming into the process. So there will be a preparation stage for those textiles before they come into our process. And then our outputs will then tap back into the global supply chain of fiber spinners and textile production. So that's kind of the bigger picture. In terms of, as soon as we have our first plant up and running, in the whole scheme of things, I mean, our goal is to play a really significant part in replacing the use of virgin raw materials. And I think before I mentioned, we're currently using 86 million tons of polyester and cotton every year. That represents quite a high number of production plants, and we're definitely not going to capture that whole space. There are other technologies in development that can address different parts of the problem. For instance, Evernew, RenewCell, Infinited Fiber, where they're able to take in cotton and produce cellulosic fiber from that. There's many variations and many different types of technologies that will solve the problem. The challenge is we need us all to be scaling rapidly and replicating these plants, as quickly as possible, because it's going to take a long time before we can really start seeing a dent in, right now, less than 1% of textiles are made from old textiles. We want to get close to 100% in the future. And it's really going to take a long time of investment in infrastructure, investment in production plants, that sort of thing before we get to that point. So it's quite a long timeline.
It's very exciting.
I'm also
very exciting.
Thank you. Yeah, it is. It is. I also wanted to add too, we were talking earlier, kind of a new component. It's not new, but it's kind of, in my view, is becoming more predominant when we talk about sustainability and circularity, is this idea around regenerative agriculture. And I think that has an important part to play in this conversation. Thinking about better ways of agriculture, growing cotton that's more in line with planetary boundaries, with, understanding the wider systemic impact. And I think that conversation is where we're going next in the industry, where we're looking at, there will be a role for cotton. We're not talking about ruling it out altogether. There will be a role for regenerative recycling. That's what we call our, it's often referred to as chemical recycling. And it can be kind of misleading to use that phrase. So we tend to use the phrase regenerative recycling, but then there's the regenerative agriculture as well. Anyway, let's
very on point. No, it's
awesome.
Good. Like, I like regenerative recycling and regenerative agriculture. I think it goes, very well hand in hand.
That's the exciting thing, is this whole space is evolving and people's understand. It's like, okay, we all understand this now. Now, what do we need to do next? And that's
exactly.
It's great to see, because it means there's progress.
Definitely. Okay, so Cyndi, just moving on to a question which actually came up in the questions and answers session after the panel, which you did with the other participants on reducing textile waste. One of the big questions which came up is, can we remove plastic from textiles? And so then I just want to follow up on that too with a follow-up question, which is polyester the right solution to that?
Wow, that's another big and loaded and multifaceted question and answer, I think, because, there is a lot of debate around polyester. There's pros and cons to it. On the pro side, on the reality side, it's the most popular, highest volume fiber we're using today. And there's a reason for it. It's because polyester does the job. It's a cheap material. It does what it needs to do in textiles, and designers use it for a reason. So, I think from a functionality perspective, to assume that we're just gonna ban it and get rid of it forever is not realistic. And I'm not sure. Personally, I don't think it's what we want, because firstly, if we look at polyester as a material and as a circular material, because it's man-made, it lends itself extremely well to being circular because, when it's gone through a use phase, it's no longer rewearable. You bring it back into a process like ours. It's had some degradation to the polymer chain. You put it into our process like ours, we're able to rebuild the polymer chain back to virgin equivalent through a very simple finishing step. And then it goes back into textiles all over again. So as a circular material, it's by far one of the best, really, because it doesn't degrade, or you can repair it, right? And the other point is that, since the industry started producing polyester for textiles, all those decades ago, we have millions of tons of the stuff on the planet already. So if we suddenly decided to ban it or not use it or put it in textiles anymore, what are we going to do with it? Are we going to put it in landfill, incinerate it, downcycle it, and then it ends up in landfill? It just doesn't make sense. I mean, let's keep using it in textiles, but there are some challenges around it and hurdles that need overcoming, like the microfiber issue, and things like that. But we need to be looking from the whole kind of environmental impact of it. Because if we're able to get it into circular recycling processes, the benefits of it, when you compare it to other fibers or certainly virgin polyester, it has huge, huge environmental benefits. So I think it's isolating polyester as one fiber. We need to be looking at it as a holistic system of all the materials we're using and take a science-based approach to it.
Are there any materials which should be 100% avoided, which are not possible to recycle?
Good question. I think most of the key materials that are being used, nylon, wool, polyester, cotton, are recyclable, whether it's through mechanical or regenerative recycling. But we do need to be looking at how things are designed and what's coming out as waste. So elastane, for example, it can come into our process, but it goes out as waste. Now, elastane is a polymer as well. It could be recycled, but the challenge is it's used in such low quantities in comparison to the other materials that for us to then separate it, effectively recycle it, the economics around that don't quite work because the volume doesn't exist, or isn't prevalent in textiles today. So I think there's, again, it's an evolving question. We have to look at the data. We have to look at functionality, the economics. All of those things have to play a part in it. Yeah.
Thank you, Cyndi. So the next question is to do with the consumers and consumer attitudes, towards sustainability, specifically with the fashion and textile space, which does have such a kind of reputation of being quite unsustainable itself. How can we change consumer attitudes? And also, is it down to the consumer only to make a move towards being more sustainable and also more circular? I love my loaded questions.
They are. Well, tell me what you think.
I think, it's down to all parties. You can't, obviously the consumer base really kind of influences what companies are doing, the approach which companies have. But I think that it's all parties have to be involved. Whether it's down to the consumer, businesses, certification bodies, everyone needs to be making a move towards sustainability. And I do think that the circular model is a very good way of beginning because nothing's going to waste in the end. But over to you.
I totally agree. And I think we need circular heroes in companies, individuals, in governments, across the board, all working towards this end goal. Yes, there are companies that have more influence, like the global brands and the marketing budgets to be able to communicate messages. And I think there's a huge huge energy for that today and desire to do that. And that has come from you know, historically, there's consumer pressure has kind of pushed brands, and that's been useful. Government interplay and bringing in legislation or incentives at the right time. And I think that's the big shift that's happening now. There's a lot of dialogue that's happening between brands, between government, between maybe not enough of the innovators. I think we need more of that, because we need to have an understanding or paint a picture of where it is we're trying to get to, what the stepping stones are for getting there, and what sort of legislative, policy would support that. Because that's going to be different today than it is in 3 years from now. And everyone playing a role, whether it's us, whether it's meaning consumers or wearers of clothes, brands, retailers, policymakers. The other key audience here are the facilitating organizations, those like the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, Fashion for Good, Sustainable Apparel Coalition. All of these industry working groups, I think, are playing a really key role in bringing those stakeholders together, because historically it's all happened in silos, and now that collaboration will help. But I think never underestimate the power of a couple of people and those circular heroes wherever they are to really drive the agenda forward.
Thank you very much. And you also being one of the circular heroes as well. So thank you very much.
Shucks. Thank you.
Thank you. So in terms of the future and how you see the fashion industry evolving, and also how we can kind of reduce the amount of textiles which are going to waste. There are many different solutions, which you also mentioned before, aside from recycling, repairing, reselling, so on and so forth. How do you think that these kind of methods can influence the future of fashion? And what do you see as the future of fashion and textiles?
Yes. Okay. So I really think that, we're moving with COVID. I think it's really transformed or made everyone think, hopefully do differently. Everyone's been cleaning out their closets. There's been all sorts of conversations around, waste, consumption, reuse models. There's been a lot more noise in this space, and not just in the industry. It's one thing living in your bubble, but we're starting to see the conversation widen out into mainstream media. Vogue's doing a lot of cover, among others, on circularity and textiles. So it shows there's a real growing interest to do and be differently than how we are today. And I think that's a great conversation to be had. There's so much happening in the space of the kind of whole reuse, repair, and rental model, with new business models and companies coming along. Yeah, I think we have a long road ahead of us. The great thing is that awareness levels have increased dramatically across the wider world, across the media, across the industry, which is a very good sign. And certainly beyond awareness, there's so much innovation, many new business models, all focused on different components of circularity, whether it's on, reuse models, rental, repair, whether it's around recycling and mechanical or regenerative recycling. There's so much innovation, a lot more collaboration. We can collaborate more, of course, but I think we're really going through this amazing time of transformation and understanding and learning. And I call it the R&D days of circularity, because we're still putting all the puzzle pieces together and working out how this new system will actually work and how it will all link up. I think we have a challenge around the fact that it is so vast, and it's not easy to communicate what circularity is because it means so many different things. So there's a challenge around that, making it simple for people. Um, but also in terms of what's possible today versus what's going to be possible in the future. Like I want to be out there talking about this idea of circularity of raw materials, but it's challenging because it doesn't quite exist yet. It's not available for people to do, um, in terms of like a solution that's available for all. So I think there's a challenge in that. So we have to talk about stepping stones. We have to talk about the solutions that are already underway and hint at what's coming, what's on the horizon. Get people excited about it. Get people engaged in it. And I got that was one of the ideas behind the initiative that we set up in collaboration with Circle Economy and Center for Circular Design, World Circular Textiles Day on October 8th. And we launched the first one last year. And we're now in the process of planning for this year. And it's really about kind of communicating. We've got a good 30 years for this whole circularity thing to roll out because we're going from a totally different way of producing and consuming to a much more efficient circular one. And the amount of change that needs to happen to enable that is huge and can be daunting, but doesn't need to be, because where we want to end up is a really exciting place. And the fun is going to be in getting there. And that's why I'm having such a great time in seeing what's happening. And every day there's a new innovation popping up, whether it's product and material ID, whether it's a new form of dyeing textiles, all of this stuff sort of, is part of making this new system, um, you know, a real utopia for the textile industry. And yeah, there's a long way to go, but we should have fun while we're, on the way to doing it.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Cyndi, for joining us today. Cyndi, the founder of One Again Technologies. We really look forward to what we're going to be seeing with One Again Technologies in the future. As a reminder, we'll be holding our Sustainable Fashion and Apparel event. We look forward to seeing you there. Thank you so much for your time, and any questions which we get coming in, I'll be sending over to you.
Thanks so much. Great to be a part of it.
Thank you, Cyndi.